Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Faith Unraveled podcast. We're so excited today to talk about how the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was a mega wedge in our relationship. And after deconstructing, how we've been able to grow so much closer as a couple, as a family. We know this is a really important topic as people begin to take the leap away from Mormonism. And you feel like there is no bottom in sight. It's very scary to jump ship from the church when it's all that you know. So we're excited to talk to you today about some of the positive aspects that have come as a result of unraveling our faith. Now, I will say this topic for today's episode emerged from the episode that I did with Mormon Stories podcast. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, babe?
No, I was just really proud of you watching you up there talk about it. The only thing I felt like you shared, you were very kind to me. I think there's times where the wedge was caused by other things outside of the scrupulosity. Now, did I feel like a disappointment at times? Yes. There was times where I definitely felt like a disappointment. Did I feel like it led to complacency? Yes, there was some leading to complacency because of that. But I do think there is a lot on my end that I had to work on myself to show up differently than the way I was showing up. So.
Okay. And just as a little recap, so a couple of weeks ago, I flew out to Utah and I sat down with John and Margie from the Mormon Stories podcast, and we did a deep dive into our story. And I talked about how my scrupulosity or my intensity for the gospel was kind of a wedge in our family because I was more intense about it than Jamie was. For sure. Yeah. And so when I got home, he said to me, wow, you were really kind.
Well, you let me, you had received the video prior to it being live and premiered, right? And so you allowed me to watch it. Because there's a little bit of nervousness in that type of situation, right?
Yeah.
I'm not there, a little bit vulnerable. And so I was a little bit concerned sharing our relationship.
What all I was going to share on the episode.
Just because it exposes me a bit and a bit of vulnerability. But as I watched it and saw what you said, I'm like, wow, you portrayed yourself in a way that you were taking all the responsibility. And I didn't feel like that was fair because I felt like there was a lot of responsibility on my end that led to the disconnection prior to the faith deconstruction. And when I say disconnect, I mean, we started operating our own lives in a manner without like really connection. And I think we were both looking to the eternal perspective and saying whatever is, the flaws that each person has, they'll be fixed once we get to the eternities. And that's part of the wedge too, because you don't address the situations now.
Absolutely.
You look and say, hey, this person might be difficult, but in the future, when we're all perfect, we'll be fine, right?
You're deferring to the eternities.
Yeah. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say is it's been a while since we've been on the podcast, partially because we've had so much going on this summer. And this is what I knew that we would run into here because we had friends coming to town and family coming to town for most of June. Then we had a couple events on the weekends.
I had a lot going on this summer, and not to mention that I've had a little bit of a health crisis.
Yeah.
And I've been getting treatments. So the abbreviated version of that is that I have been severely iron deficient for like probably years, probably at least a decade.
I've known you, I think.
Yeah.
So.
I was diagnosed with low iron like when we were first married, and it just never got better. And so it was at the point that I was almost like cognitively
you almost
declining.
needed a blood transfusion of how bad the iron was.
So I've been working with a blood doctor. Yeah. We've been doing some iron treatments, and I'm starting to feel better, and the brain fog's lifting, and that's a topic for a totally different channel. So, but that will be coming probably.
But to
soon.
get back on target
so
here.
You want to defend me? You're not coming here to defend yourself.
No,
I
want
to say there's a little bit more to that wedge. So I appreciate that so much. You know what? There's so many different ways to tell a story. Isn't that true? Don't you find that to be true?
It's everybody's different perceptions of the story, right?
And it's also just based on kind of what lens you're looking through, why certain things happen. There's so many contributing factors. And I think there's just so many different ways to tell a story. So everything that you're going to share today is true for you. Everything I shared on the podcast was true for me. Right now, I feel like we're in our own spaces, really trying hard to do our own work. And part of that is reflected in a person's ability to take responsibility. And so I think that the best case scenario is that both people can come together and say, here, this is where I had responsibility, where I dropped the ball, where I had blind spots. And if both of us are showing up to the relationship in this way, it really leaves a lot of room for healing. And so I appreciate that you are willing to show up to this conversation, sharing your own shortcomings. Because I know I definitely know.
Yeah,
I definitely have mine.
Yeah, and I would say it not only impacted you, but I think it also impacted the relationships with my kids also. And so this has been a healing time as you deconstruct religion. You start looking at all your relationships, and one of the relationships I looked at were my kids, and then you, of course. And so you could easily see and feel as you start stepping away from the church the disconnection that we had across all the relationships.
Yeah,
I feel like and we've said this on this podcast, I think our kids see us very differently now than they do back then. And one way I think they feel that we're really different is we're all about connections and experiences and trying to bring things together. Matter of fact, last weekend we went to Hard Summer as a family. We took our two oldest children with us.
Which is a festival/rave.
Yeah, and it was super fun to be there.
It
It was super fun to be there with our son and our daughter and just having a fun time together and accepting, like, there was alcohol, of course. And so we were a little bit in an altered state, but we were able to enjoy one another's company and get, I think that experience got us closer together as a family too. So
It was really special. That time together was really special.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so what we're going to be talking about for today's episode is we'll give a little recap of the Mormon Stories podcast episode. I'll try to do that in like under a minute. And then we're going to dive into the wedges that you see the gospel was in our family life, in our relationship. We're going to talk about the impacts on maturity, kind of the human development phases and how that is influenced by getting married young. We're going to talk about the patriarchy, and for you specifically, how you've done the work with that, understanding that you were at the top of this, you were the beneficiary of this social hierarchy.
I was in a privileged position.
Yeah, you were the beneficiary of the social hierarchy we call patriarchy. And it doesn't just harm women. Patriarchy arguably harms men as well.
Yeah.
And then we're going to talk about complacency and how that church wedge
led to complacency in a relationship.
Yeah.
So.
And then, and then an invitation to do the work to all of our friends and people listening. And I think that's super important. And there's so many good resources out there. We live in the best time ever.
Yeah.
Like, there's so much available at our fingertips. So the first thing is just the theme of the episode of Mormon Stories podcast was that leaving the church saved our family. And it's taken 5 years to dismantle that and to understand really the harm that the church, that there was harm, and that there was also a beauty, and all the most beautiful aspects of our life came as a result of the gospel.
Can I say
quote unquote? But there was also harm.
Sorry. No, I didn't mean to interrupt. But what I wanted to share is most members will not understand and see the harm.
No.
Like, as you're in it, all you're thinking is the great things, Christ-like attributes, the the gospel. And so it's very hard for a member to listen to this and hear, hey, the church was a wedge. It was more of a wedge to me than it was helping our relationship is my feeling now after stepping back. And so if you're a member, if you're listening to this will be very triggering for you.
From my perspective, the wedge of the church was that the way that I think about it is that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints kind of comes with a playbook. Like, this is the way that it's to be done. It's how we should live, how we should spend our money, how we should spend our time, how we should dress, how we should eat, and also how we should run our family unit. And so from my perspective, the family proclamation is very specific about the way that a man is to lead their family. And the wedge was that I have that expectation on you. Yeah. You need to be leading our family prayer, family scripture. You should be engaged in your calling. The more time away you spent doing your calling, the more I felt like our family would be blessed because of that, because of those sacrifices. I was looking to you to sacrifice for our family. Now, from your perspective.
Yeah, the church has always been a struggle for me since high school, like since I was a kid, like did not like sitting in church for 3 hours. And I've had to push myself and say, hey, that's the church gives you like these tropes, like that's a natural man's an enemy to God. You need to hold to the rod, and it gives you these sayings to say, hey, whatever your intuition,
the correction.
Yeah, the intuition that your body's telling you is wrong because it's Satan or it's a natural man that's trying to steer you away from that. When you now realize it was truly yourself saying, hey, this is not fitting with you.
For sure.
And it changed me over time. Like people who knew me when I was probably in high school felt like I was introverted when I was in high school, introverted when I was in the church, because it grinded on me.
So just to recap, when you were in school or like in the singles ward, you seemed very extroverted to your friends. But when you got into adult life and things got really serious and there's all these expectations on you, you essentially became like this introvert because you didn't vibe with what the church was giving you.
I didn't feel good with anything. I didn't feel good when going to Sunday school. I didn't feel good around other members of the church who were very scrupulous in their decisions. I felt like my thought processes were never going to be aligned to someone who is super orthodox in the church. And that started, like, I would say a few years into our marriage, and where you started seeing me like not be fully dedicated. The one thing I told Elisha was the church becomes a cheat code for people. It gives you like a full on step-by-step guide to, you don't have to think. Like now we have to think. We have to think, what are our values? We have to think about, like, how do we want to teach our kids about alcohol? How do we want to teach our kids about alcohol? How do we want to teach our kids about drugs? How do we want to teach our kids about chastity? The church has a full book formula on all that stuff. It sends you on a mission where you get pushed outside of your comfort zone. It puts you in front of people and giving talks. And so it has a lot of
makes it more simple.
But it keeps it very simple. And then when you step out, life isn't simple. It is very complicated and it's very nuanced. It's not binary. It's not this or this. It's very nuanced.
There can be two right ways to do something.
Exactly. And so you have to like think through this as you step away, where the church becomes this cheat code for those who are in the church, where they don't have to think. They just know the path and they just follow that path. One of those paths is getting married at a very young age. You were 18. I was 22. Getting married at that time in your life is
big mistake. Just
kidding. It could be very harmful because you're so immature. You don't know life. You don't know what you want in life. You don't know your sexuality. You don't know. There's so many things you don't know about yourself, where you start, like for me, I started figuring out who I was in my 30s. Well, I had to redo that all over again after the faith crisis.
You know, one of the things that I've noticed is in a lot of relationships, if you got married really young, there's a good chance that you developed some immature habits, like communicative habits. And over time, those can become really hard to break. And that might mean, like, who knows what it is? Maybe it's that one person is like in conflict avoidant to like a toxic degree where they just stonewall you every time there's any kind of pushback. Or maybe one person is verbally abusive to the other one. I mean, we've seen personally a lot of relationships where there's verbal abuse going on. And I want to say, like, maybe part of that has to do with the fact that they were married too young, that they didn't learn how to communicate properly. Like these human developmental phases happen, like, I mean, your entire life, there's development all the way until the day that you die. And so the relationships where you learn to have like mature relationships, a lot of that develops in the workplace. A lot of it develops like with roommates or having, you know, coworkers or like difficult professors or whatever it is. And if you're just getting married at 18, you are potentially going to be developing bad habits, and they'll compound that with the patriarchy.
Yeah.
Like how much of that has to do with a man saying like, I'm the head of this household.
Yeah. Well, and in the temple, you were supposed to hearken unto me as I hearkened unto God. And so did
that impact you? Did that impact your experience being the father?
I came into that marriage thinking that was probably the single most quote that impacted me the most as I was getting married, and into the first like 5 years of a relationship. I felt like I'm the head of the household. You need to like follow me. I'm the one that has the priesthood power, right? That's all going through a 22-year-old brain. Like a 22-year-old does not know a lot about life. And so what they learn about life is what they see or hear. And so, you know, the church teaches that as its core principle. And so that itself becomes a huge wedge, and you're immature in that mindset and then that thought process. It's not like you have 10 years of a relationship or 10 years within a company where you have to learn how to filter and communicate with other people. Then what happens is your emotional response to your significant other becomes at times probably tense and reactive. And I felt like for myself, I reacted to some certain situations pretty poorly because of my immaturity. And it had major ramifications on you and how you felt about yourself and how you felt about the relationship. And that sticks with it. Like the first 5 years, I feel like down the road, whatever we did at that point in time, you could say, well, that was 10 years ago, 15 years ago, but it's like a nail on a board, and you hit that nail, even though that nail's gone, it's still, there's a mark. Yeah, there's still a mark. Yeah, there's still a mark there that's impacting like how you feel about me and how I feel about you, right? Over time. And so you talked about a sound bath where you put purity culture and burned it. I burned the first 5 years of Jamie in that relationship because I can look back on that and see the harm I was doing with the way I was asserting power in our relationship because of the immaturity. Like I was super immature at that time. I was still a boy. I still thought of like boy things at that time. I wasn't in a maturity space to where I could show up in a relationship on an equal level. I was taught that like we were the kind of the boss, and the way I was raised was I was raised in a leave it to beaver type of society where
at 12 you had more power than your mom.
Yeah. And so
because of the priesthood, right?
Yeah. And so that was the wedge that the church had taught us in our relationship, because I never felt we were on an even playing field from the very beginning.
I don't even think we had a concept of what an even playing field was.
I would agree.
Because the patriarchy is the foundation for godhood, which is the entire reason that we got married, is because you are evolving into an eternal state of exaltation, meaning you're going to be gods. And I'm there to support you in your godhood. This is our belief. And so it's such an interesting place coming from this position of patriarchy as the woman, because your role is literally to uplift your husband so that he can lead your family. But you can't be the one to make the decisions. It's not your role to make the final decision. So you're trying to encourage him to be his best, but you're relying on whatever his final decision is.
Yeah.
And so I felt like, are you praying about it? Are you going to the temple? Are you doing all the things? So a lot of the things that I was doing that were putting pressure on you, it was because I was trying to help uplift you as a strong leader of our family.
Yeah. Which I can see is very problematic, and where you were disappointed in the relationship, because I probably wasn't showing up in those areas that you wanted me to show up, but I was still trying to guide the family as if I was the patriarch. And you're like, hey, I married you because of your priesthood, and you're not like magnifying it to the extent that I expect you to magnify it, which there's the disappointment. And I felt that, but I also felt like, you were raised in in a very equal environment. Your dad cooked. Your mom was a single mom for a while.
Well, after my parents' divorce, that's when I saw that, because when you have a single parent that's having to do everything, then the gender roles go out the window, right? Because if you're a single dad, you have to get your kids to their appointments. You have to schedule with their teachers. You have to help with clothes and cooking and all those things. So seeing both of my parents in those elements, that happened after the divorce.
But that's what you knew in your life, though. I felt like that's the way you showed up into the marriage, and I didn't understand that and see that, and I could never pull that forward because I didn't know how. It was because of the immaturity that I had in the relationship. Not until I got into a work environment and saw how women and men could operate on an equal level, did I start realizing that the way I was running the house was problematic. And I feel like that's the reason why I burnt the first 5 years of our marriage, because I felt like I started changing that and seeing that was a problem. And then that might have led into the 2008, 2009 timeframe, where I started feeling like really a lot of tension, and I started doing a little bit more research, and I found some stuff that didn't line with the church at that point in time. But I think it had become such a wedge in our relationship. Your scrupulousness, my privilege, and the way that I handled that privilege, and my immaturity led into the next phase of our marriage, which was more of a complacent marriage, where we still helped each other. You have all these business ideas, and I've always helped you with those business ideas. But we started operating in our two modes, I would say, during the 2010 to 2020 timeframe on our own, and really didn't work on our own relationship and connection, because I think the wedge was there at that point in time.
And I have this visualization of like that triangle that they always give you, where they say, even the sealer always does this, the head of the household's over here, the wife is here on his right side, and up at the top is
God,
Jesus Christ, the Godhead, we'll say, the Holy Ghost, and that eternal perspective is like both of you looking at that thing up above you and not actually looking at each other.
Yeah. Like,
what is best for you? And so for a man to show up to this conversation and say, I have been the beneficiary of this hierarchy, and now I realize that has harmed you, and that is not the best for our relationship.
Yeah.
How about if we burn that down and we create a relationship on an even playing field?
That's exactly what happened in the faith crisis, right? The faith crisis goes through it, and then you realize everything that you've been taught since you were a little kid is all false,
yeah,
bogus, It's all full of shit. And now as I was going through that year of the hardest time in my entire life, and I started looking at my relationships. I started looking at our relationship and how we interacted with one another. I realized we were not connecting as a couple at all.
And you would even say to me, like, what have I done?
Yeah, I felt like I had damaged this relationship beyond repair at one point in time. I felt like, oh my goodness, I can see like the problems with the patriarchy. See, I can see the problems in our relationship where we weren't connecting. We were just, we were like on our own inner tubes, not holding hands, just floating down the river. And I had wondered whether or not that because we didn't connect for so long, whether or not we could even come back and connect. I didn't know if we were even compatible enough to work through those issues because of the wedge. And I didn't even see it as your scrupulosity at all. I saw it all as something that I did myself. Did I feel like I was a disappointment to you during that period? Yes, I did. But I felt like I had caused that based upon the way I was immature in our communication style and the way that I ran the family. But it wasn't just you. I looked at my daughter and I said, oh my goodness, my daughter made a statement like, Dad, you were always, I always felt it like a disappointment to her. To me,
everybody feels like a disappointment. What is going on?
And I'm like, oh
how do we all love each other so much, and yet every person in this family,
we're supposed to have this unconditional love, right?
Yes, and yet somehow everybody feels like a disappointment.
Yeah, and so I realized,
and that's because of the requirements set out by that playbook. They're unachievable. This is what Luna Lindsay talks about. Like, they're unachievable parameters. All the things that we're supposed to be doing and somehow connecting as a family while we're all spending a bazillion hours a week on all of our different responsibilities. And it's impossible.
The church gets you so busy to where you cannot really connect with someone.
And that's the complacency. It's like that eternal perspective. It takes your eyes off of what is in front of you.
Yeah.
And that's devastating to think about how precious and brief this life is, and that we're all just willing to just
look past it. Yeah. Not live in the moment, but look past it. And so that's one of the reasons why we do these music festivals and go out on weekends and go to the beach on weekends as families, because we want to build that connection. But you could say that that's a priority in the church, but like maybe family home meetings, but you're doing like crazy gospel like topics for family home meetings, or it's so like you're still focused on the church or God or Jesus, someone else outside of the person right next to you. And so there was a lot of work I had to do with myself at that point in time, and realizing like my communication patterns were driven by the church, my power and privilege was driven by the church. The way I interacted with all my family members was driven by the church. And you have to like tear that down completely and start rebuilding that from ground up. And you have to hope that that wedge isn't so large where you want to, like, the other people want to reset in that relationship as they start realizing the harm the church did. And sometimes I feel like some people feel that harm was directed by that person instead of like the system that they're in.
Whenever we talk about something being systemic, this is a challenge to the viewers to look at what's going on and understand that the people that are behaving the way that they are, that's being influenced by something much bigger, something that is strategic, by a system. It's written in a certain way to achieve a certain outcome. And so whenever something is systemic, we have to look. It goes beyond the people. The people are in a systemic situation very often the victims of the system. And I would say that even though the church is in a lot of ways brought me the most beautiful experiences of my life, it was also the cause of so much heartache in our family.
Yeah. The system.
It compelled us to behave the way we did.
Yeah. And this is where you have to be very careful as you leave the church to not blame the people who are within the system, even your close member friends who are still within the system and that won't want to listen to you. You have to accept that that's the system that they're in.
Yeah.
They know no different.
Yeah.
And so it's hard for you, like, because you're feeling judged and all that, but they are part of that system. We were part of that system. That system created that wedge. And so it came to a point in time where I had to realize, like, I had to get rid of that system and everything around it. So I had to rip myself down.
Because real quick, a pause, who is that created to benefit? The church has created a system that benefits them.
Yeah, 100%.
It's the system that produces tithing and all the man hours that it takes to run the thing, literal man hours, although women are...
Man and women hours.
Men are the ones getting the credit for running it when a lot of it is the women doing the hard work, right?
Yeah, you're totally right.
Right?
You're totally right.
But it's literally every part of it, whether you're talking about eternal families or like getting to the temple, like all the conversation around that, like it's all around getting people to pay tithing. And
so this is what I wanted to share. Like when I started realizing we were not having deep conversations, that I had never really had really deep conversations with you. We had to learn how to. Exactly. And what I did is this was the first thing I bought.
It says best self intimacy, and it's a card deck, right?
It's 150 card prompts, and it has different types of cards. It had like life on it. It had relationship. It had about you.
They're conversation prompts.
Yeah, this one's on the red ones are on intimacy, so it talks around sex and stuff around that. And then there's one around life itself. But I started with this, and I remember us driving up to, I think it was like our anniversary. We went to Dana Point, and I brought these cards with us, and I started just like asking you reading a card, and then
just pull one and give an example. So we had to teach ourselves how to connect in new ways, and a lot of it was just expanding our scope of conversation topics. Yeah,
where we can get in more on a deeper level. And it's okay for you to have a different opinion than I do on some of these cards. Like here's one of them.
Love it.
Describe a time when I disappointed you, but you acted like nothing was wrong.
Ooh.
And so it gets into some like deeper conversations to where you have to like think through it. Here's an intimacy one.
There's times I have to say that he's pulled a card and I've thought, and I have said out loud, I don't think I can go here right now. Like the question that you just asked.
When we first started this, you wouldn't answer. And that's what worried me. I'm like, oh my goodness, she can't answer some basic questions here.
The one that was like the one you just did, like a time that I disappointed you, but you acted like nothing was wrong. That has a potential to bring up kind of a hard conversation. So there have been times even recently that I'm like, I don't really want to, didn't that happen earlier today? Like you asked me something about when we were first married and I'm like, I don't really want to go there right now. Like, I just don't want to hurt you, or you were basically asking an accountability question. Like, what's something that has always kind of bothered you? And I just didn't feel like
and that's how I started
realizing
how disconnected, because I didn't know some of these answers myself. And
it was hard to hear.
Yeah.
And are you at a place maturity wise that you can, this is kind of rhetorical, but are you at a place maturity wise that you can hear the answer to some of these questions and not be like, nuh-uh.
Yeah, get very defensive on it, right?
That is not what happened. You have to just be willing to go, oh, that's your perspective. My daughter just pulled one out on me the other day with my parenting. And I was just like, what? I always made an effort not to do that. Are you sure? You know, and then I'm like, okay, well, that was gaslighting. So to her, that's her reality. And that's how she remembered it. It's not how I remembered it, but like just being willing to show up to that conversation and have the maturity to say, wow.
Yeah. Like this,
I'm so sorry that you experienced it that way. Do you have another one you want to give us an example?
What do you wish we did more of in our sex life? So this is more intimacy based.
Oh, love it.
And then here's one that's more, I am blind now, by the way.
Do you want me to read it?
Turning 50. How would you like your life to be different in 3 years? Like, so it gives you some things to think about. And so it also gives you always talked about, like, if you always in your relationship talked about doctrinal stuff or where you never had a more like who you are type of conversations, these can kick off those types of conversations in a way.
There's so many of them, and we have so many of them. We have the Delve deck. That one's really fun. What's this one called?
The Best Self Intimacy deck?
Best Self. Yeah, there's a lot of different ones, but that's part of how we've done the work. The other thing that we've done is our book club, and that's been really big.
We did a lot of self-help books last year.
Yeah, last year was self-help. And this year we're kind of going into some new topics.
I would say emotion regulation books to how we should regulate our emotions, conflict, and how do we work through conflict.
Some of the books we've read. We started with The Alchemist, which was kind of a fun start. That's not a self-help, but it's very reflective. That one was really great for prompting conversation. And then once we were done reading a book, I would look up the questions on Google because there's always like book club questions that you can look up. And then we would just like on a date night, we'd be sitting at the drive-thru in and out and one of us asking the questions, and then we'd go back and forth on the answers. But we did The Alchemist. We read The Four Agreements. We did Michael Singer's, what was that Michael Singer? Untethered Soul. We did...
Eckhart Tolle. We tried Eckhart Tolle.
Yeah, we need to dive back into that. What was the other big one? Oh, How to Do the Work. That
Gary
one was
Zukav.
Great. Gary Zukav, Seat of the Soul.
Yeah.
And here's the thing that's so cool, you guys. When you read a book after you deconstructed religion, you can take parts of it and ditch parts of it and talk about your critiques of the author and talk about like how you really feel differently about this or that, or might have been kind of problematic, or here's what I want to take. And that is such a refreshing perspective, because how many times did I read like a gospel book that was written by, I don't know, Neil Maxwell or something, and thought to myself, wow, I need to figure out how to align with that. Yeah. And now, like, some of these books might not resonate with you at all. The Gary Zukav is so wooey.
But it's really good.
But I actually loved it. It was like diving into the idea of like,
it was really good.
But you have soul evolution, reincarnation.
You have to take the concepts, and if you do believe in reincarnation, that might be a great book for you. But even if you don't, it was still very enlightening and helped me focus on certain attributes within myself and what I wanted to bring forward. It talks about positivity and the law of attraction, and I think all that is really good. So the other thing I was going to say that we started doing is we really started mindfully going out on like date nights and doing things with family members. So the first one I remember is Thrive had a big party on New Year's Eve, and we got to take our daughter and our son-in-law. I don't know. He's our daughter's boyfriend.
But
they've been like boyfriend, girlfriend for 5 years. So
whenever we're talking about him, we're just like our son-in-law.
Yeah. And then we got to take our oldest son with us too to that event. And it was just such a fun event where we were all able to let loose and dance and just have fun. And we've done a number of these types of events with our middle son just turned 21, so now we can take him. But prior to the beginning of this year, we would take our daughter to like clubs and stuff, and just do things as a family, stuff that we never did as
Was it
as
us
members.
taking her or her taking us?
It was her taking us. The first time we did this club crawl with her, And it was just such a fun experience. Like she
Yeah.
was like, Dad, you can't drink this with this. And she was
Yeah.
helping
She's
us like,
drink your water.
Yep.
You got your water? Have you had your water?
yeah. And so it's been a wonderful experience just to start getting to know each other at levels like without any judgment. So they can show up with who they are, and there is no judgment whatsoever on what they're doing, and we're just experiencing life together. And so that's where I think I met with each one of my kids, apologized for who I was prior to the faith deconstruction, and then told them that I would, my plan is to be a better dad as we get moved down past the faith deconstruction. And I've purposely tried to engage and connect with them on levels that I didn't connect with them before. Every day of the week, I take my son working out, my youngest, with us. The middle son, we have our movies. We always do movie night together. My daughter, that's our music festivals and stuff with our oldest, because she's into the same things that we are. And so we, like Fisher, last Christmas, we went to Odessa in Vegas, and she's like, Dad, I really want to go see Fisher. I want to go see Fisher. And Fisher was coming to Hard Summer. And so we're like, let's go see.
Let's go.
Yeah, go to Hard Summer. So it was just such a great time and a great experience. And so that wedge is completely gone. I would say that the only wedge that we currently have today is caused by us.
Yeah. I think it's hard to not get in our own way at sometimes. Like every single person, if you're breathing, you're making mistakes, and hopefully cognizant of them and willing to take feedback. I think really the biggest factor in whether you're able to repair a relationship or not is whether or not you're able to, both people are willing to self-reflect, and show up. Yeah. And it's hard to do. That's really hard to do, especially when the programming is so deep. Yeah.
Yeah. What I found myself is I had to rip everything. I had to rip everything out.
Do you know what I just heard is the core feature of a healthy person?
Flexibility. Which I agree with now.
It's huge.
What I see in my life is when I'm trying to push my kids to what I want them to be or who I want them to be, or pushing you to do what my mind says. You have an ADHD brain. I have probably more of an OCD.
I got some of that too.
Yeah, you do.
I got all of it.
But you have to accept people for who they are, and some people just can't change things. That's just who they are. And so being flexible and accepting them for who they are, I think is important. So
accepting the inflexibility for what it is. Is that what you said?
I think you do that too. You have to, for the people who...
You also got to make a decision of whether or not you can keep doing it, if it's healthy for you to do it. Accepting someone doesn't necessarily mean being in a relationship with them, right?
That's right.
So if someone is not willing to be flexible or have any degree of self-reflection, at some point you have to decide whether or not you're going to continue that.
Yeah, well, you have to create a boundary.
You can still love them.
And that boundary...
And they can still be a lovable person.
Yeah.
And that's how they want to live their life. Everybody has their autonomy. Everybody has their agency. And so then, you have to make a decision whether you're going to do that.
Yeah. If you feel like it harms you, then you might have to take space.
Yeah.
Right?
Accepting other people shouldn't come at the expense of your own worth and your own self, there are times I think that a relationship has to end if someone is not willing to show up to the relationship. And then that is kind of to a degree an acceptance.
Well, and
you're accepting that is the person. Like if it's an inflexible person who is not capable of self-reflection or change or showing up, then the acceptance may come in the form of ending the relationship. That may be part of that too. It doesn't mean that you have to hate them.
No, or it doesn't mean that the relationship failed too. That's the other thing.
It
right?
could be that that's what you both achieved through this relationship.
Yeah,
There's learning.
A phase, and it's time to move on past that
we
phase.
go through,
Yeah.
It's hard when chapters end. It's really hard. I think that it's lucky where we landed. And I think that it's just lucky that we're more compatible now than we were back then.
Yeah.
And I know that's not the case for everyone, but I have hope that we all continue to grow and evolve, and that we can do that. Sometimes it's together, sometimes it's solo.
Mm-hmm. I think number one, you have to do your own work.
Yeah.
And you can't expect.
Dropping expectations has kind of been the core to our relationship evolution.
Well, and if you're doing your own work, then you realize that flexibility is very key into the work, and you're able to then accept more. You accept more of how people are showing up.
It's really difficult to, sorry, I'm still on this from a couple sentences ago. It's really impossible, I would argue, to drop expectations when you're in a high demand church system like we were in.
The church can't, it's all about expectations.
Yes.
So I don't think
it's very
you can
difficult.
Drop the expectations.
A marriage is very difficult under those circumstances.
Yeah.
And I do know some mixed faith marriages where they've decided to drop the expectations just so that their relationship could continue. So I know there are people that are doing it, but they're having to drop some of that church influence, because if you're running by the church, the family proclamation, yes, there are absolutely expectations that you have on your spouse and on your children and on yourself.
And the difficulty around the mixed faith is you can't show up with who you are at times. I feel like it's very hard to, and it's very few people, very few members that will show up where you're at if you're ex-Mormon. I how many people probably judged us for going to a rave.
I can count them on. I can count them on like just a few fingers
for the ones that showed up, right?
Yeah.
Like there's not a lot of people that can show up and support you for who you are.
They're kind of in that nuanced Mormon category.
Yeah. But you can imagine if you're in a relationship, like how that feels. So
it probably felt a little offensive that we took a totem that literally said CTR, choose the rave.
Well, and let me address that just real quick here. I think part of the healing that we go through as we leave the church is laughing at the stuff that held control over us
and rewriting the script.
Both. So for me, that's what that was. That was not, and if you get offended, that's on you, and that's not on me.
Choose the right means choose what we tell you to do.
Exactly.
That's what choose the right means in the church.
It was a symbol of control.
Yes,
for
it was
us.
a symbol of control.
And so for me, changing that symbol, laughing at it, and reframing it was very healing.
Yeah.
And matter of fact, everybody who was in that, we had a good number of ex-Mormons that were around us, and we had a bunch of ex-Mormons that came to us too after they saw that. We all talked about how healing it was and being together in that environment.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I love it.
Yep.
All right. Well, anything else you want to add to today?
No, hopefully this is helpful for people, but I did want to respond so that I felt like the way that was perceived didn't share like the wedge that I had caused myself. And I know you felt that. And so I just wanted to be able to voice my issues forward that I caused with that wedge also.
Well, I appreciate that. And I think just in the fact that you wanted to sit down and do this episode today after my Mormon Stories podcast episode shows where you're at. I mean, you're in a really good place, and I appreciate it because you're a great partner.
Yeah. I think we're both showing up in ways that we never showed up in the past. And that's part of that is getting rid of that wedge that we had.
It's an ongoing effort.
It's an ongoing journey. We'll continue to work on it. Right.
Yeah. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining us today. Please let us know in the comments what you thought of today's episode. And if you are joining us on podcast, we'd love to hear from you in the form of a review. We are so grateful to connect with you guys through this experience. Faith deconstruction can be painful, it can be beautiful, and we feel honored to be on this journey with you. So make it a great week, you guys, and we will see you soon. Bye, guys.